Hi there, Michael.
Hi there, Tyler.
What's going on?
Nothing. I can't believe we've made it to the end of our first season.
We've gotten some really good. We've covered some really good ground this season.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for a first season too, some of the albums that we covered, let's be
Hmm.
real. There's a couple of them who's going to argue against them being a perfect album. There's
Yes.
some as the kids say, some real bangers this season. Would you agree?
Strictly bangers. Strictly
Strict
bangers.
strictly bangers. That's gonna be the name of my autobiography.
Strictly bangers. Yeah.
Strictly Bangers, the Michael Osinski story.
Yeah. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm Tyler Esselman. This is my buddy. This is my buddy Michael Osinski.
That's me.
That's
We're
him.
here. We're here at This One Goes to 11.
Yeah, this one goes to 11. So if this is your first time tuning in, it's a podcast. This is what you signed up for. You signed up for a podcast, and that's what you got. You got a podcast. um, and this podcast is an opportunity for us to talk to people about music, about albums in particular. We're talking about the phenomenon, the musical phenomenon that is an album. And we challenge people to bring us one that they believe is perfect with quotes around it. So what that means is a little bit up to their interpretation. It's been a really rich topic of discussion. What is this concept of perfect? But it basically, they're making their case, right, for an album that they believe is perfect.
So perfect, in fact, that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
It goes all the way to 11.
All the way to 11.
Yes.
I feel like if we ever make, merch for this podcast, that people
Mhm.
are going to accuse us of just being like, oh, it's just a Spinal Tap reference, which, yeah, it is.
Of
But
course it is, yeah.
I don't know. We'll have to figure out what our catchphrase is or what's going to be on the
Yeah.
coffee mug for the podcast. I don't know.
Oh, I could use a coffee mug. I think of course it is a Spinal Tap reference, but I think it's one that's apt, and it's just become part of the lexicon anyway. So I think it's that, I feel good about our choice to start with that.
I think that's right. I think that's
I
right.
think it's right. I think it's right. But today we're not having a guest on today, as we have for the majority of the other episodes. We started our season with just me and Michael talking about one of our perfect albums, and so we already did me earlier this season, and so now it is Michael's turn to present an album that he believes is perfect, that goes all the way to 11 for him. And Michael, what album hath thou brought before the tribunal this week?
Well, I have brought an album that I believe goes to 11 in the same way that is meant in the Spinal Tap movie, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And that album is Sleater-Kinney, The Woods.
Man, if there is one phrase that I so closely associate with Michael Osinski, it is Sleater-Kinney. Those two things are just you and Sleater-Kinney are two peas in a pod, two kindred spirits, if you will.
I'll take that as a compliment. I do. Kindred spirits is a good term because I feel like most of the bands that I've identified with over time, there's something, ineffable, maybe. I don't know if that's the right adjective there, but something I just can't quite put my finger on that I feel like I share with the people who have created the music. Not to say, I'm just like them, but it's there's something there.
Yeah.
There's something that I feel like we see the world the same way, or we experience music the same way, or something like that.
Yeah. That much is very clear because, the way you make your art, the way you create, as well as there's sort of like some imparting of a worldview, imparting of, what matters to you. So that, all good art, it seems, would do that, impart the worldview that you can kind of try to identify with or try to like see yourself in that. I think there's a good argument for that being like something fundamental to the experience of this.
Yeah, and I like to make loud art, and they are a loud band.
They're a loud band, man. Yeah, my headphones told me that my phone told me I had to turn down the volume. Did I
I'm
tell you
not
that?
surprised. I'm not
I told you
surprised.
that. Yeah, because you just can't really have this down low. It doesn't make sense.
No, it's. I know we didn't really talk about this too much this season, but I do feel maybe it'll come up next season. Like sometimes the way you listen to music, like your earbud or headphone of choice, doesn't always convey the full extent of what the music is offering. I mean, I just think about, you know, whether you're listening to it in your car or on a speaker out loud, or like going directly to your ear holes. You know what I mean? Like it's and this is an album you want to be careful not to put too close to your ear holes, because you may, you know, you're gonna need a miracle ear in a few years.
You know, okay, that reminds me a little bit of a sidebar. So, do you wear earplugs? I mean, this is assuming you go to concerts, which right now we're not really going to concerts and stuff. But but when you were going to concerts before pre-pandemic, were you wearing earplugs?
I was not, but I never. Only occasionally did I get super, super close.
Yeah.
And unfortunately or fortunately, Sleater-Kinney is one of those occasions where I was pretty close to the stage.
Were you plugged up that night?
I can't remember. The closest I've ever been to them, I don't think I was. But I also I don't think we were standing right by a speaker, so it wasn't.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it depends on the acoustics of the space, right? I've seen them in varying sizes of venues at this point. But most of the time I'm seeing them in an only a pretty small space. So the sound is compact, but I never left their concerts with ringing for days or anything like that.
Yeah, that's rough.
Which is surprising.
Yeah.
Either that means that my hearing was already going, or they just did a good job of keeping it at a respectable level.
Probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, probably both.
I know. I think nowadays, if I start to go to concerts more often now, I think I might start wearing earplugs for the louder shows, because it's just worth it. You know, you're not really missing out on that much if it's such a loud show anyway. It's more about the, almost the physical sensation at that point.
Yeah, and this is the band I've actually seen the most times in concert.
Oh, really? How many?
It's either 6 or 7. I think it might be 7 now. I'd have to really think back about every single specific time. But yeah, I've seen them. I mean, and I've seen them pre the Woods and post the Woods. So
right before, or so after that big hiatus.
Yeah, I've seen them twice since the hiatus, actually. So
wow. Okay, well, speaking of which, before we get too deep into it, we have to reintroduce this band for our listeners who may not be familiar with Sleater-Kinney.
That's true, because they're not super well known.
Not super well known. They're obviously a very famous band, but they're not like, they're not like some of the acts that we've been talking about this season. They're not like Prince. They're not.
That's true.
Yeah, there's matters of scale here. So for those of you who this is your first time with us, we like to do something where we give the new listener, someone who may have never heard of this album or artist, a 60-second recap that we like to call the Beginner's Guide to the Woods by Sleater-Kinney. And I'm going to be doing that for you today. I will be. I'll be sharing a little bit of my wisdom, and Michael will be evaluating the job. Being the resident Sleater-Kinney expert, he will evaluate the adequateness of my 60-second recap. So, anything else you want to add to that before I go for it?
I don't think so. This is the last recap of the season, though. So, just if you screw it up, then I
might screw it up.
There's going to be months of people thinking, "Oh man, that Tyler Esselman, like."
Well, he's a real waste of space.
hey, none of that. None of that.
Okay, are we ready? I'm ready.
All right. Well, I got 60 seconds on the clock.
Okay.
And starting now.
Prepare your Doc Martens and your zines and chapbooks. Today we're talking punk and riot girl icon Sleater-Kinney. Formed in Olympia, Washington by Corin Tucker, Carrie Brownstein, and Janet Weiss, Sleater-Kinney grew out of the constellation of female-driven punk bands living, laughing, and loving in the Pacific Northwest in the late 90s and early aughts. Their stripped-down, muscular, guitar-forward sound provides the perfect vehicle for the band's leftist ideals and their tear-your-heart-open honesty. Ever dedicated to the DIY ideals of the riot girl scene, the band's members are multi-talented beyond reason, as seen in their varied body of work outside of music, the prime example being Carrie Brownstein's acclaimed TV series Portlandia. The Woods was their 7th studio album by the ladies, released in 2005, just before the band took an extended hiatus. Inspired heavily by a dense classic rock sound, The Woods serves as a powerful expression of the swashbuckling rock prowess of these women. Sleater-Kinney continued to record their most recent album, released in summer of 2021, and their rebellious progressive message has never seemed more timely.
All right.
You got it
in. You got it in. You got it all in.
I got it. It's an overview.
Yeah. And they're tricky too because I mean there's a lot of interviews have been done, a lot of articles have been written, but I mean they're not. I was for today. I was sort of re-looking over the Wikipedia page for the Woods, and I was amazed by the lack of information about the album. Yeah.
I mean, I think that speaks to they're still kind of niche. Not to say that there's essentially value in that, but they still sort of are. They're not quite mainstream.
No, and I don't think the Woods has even sold over 100,000 copies, which is
it's also probably a function of the time. Because 2005, right? We got that right.
2005, there were still people were still buying CDs back then. I mean, it was like
true. It was 2008 or 2009 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like I know that I first accessed the album not via a CD, but I'll tell that story in a little bit. But I mean, like the MP3 thing was happening, but I mean, I remember buying the physical copy of the CD for this. So
yeah, it's a good cover. It's like good album artwork.
Yeah, it's I would argue. I mean, maybe one of their best album covers. I think.
Yeah, it's clean. There's a it's a very clean image. It's striking, high contrast. So okay. This is Sleater-Kinney for us. So let's talk.
Well, I gotta evaluate you first.
Oh yeah, you do. How would you rate me on the job I did?
I would say I think you captured the spirit of the band quite well. I'm going to correct one point you made, which is Janet Weiss was not their drummer originally. Was someone named Laura McFarlane. And we'll get into the whole Janet Weiss of it all later because there's some drama surrounding that.
Tons there.
She by the way, she is, oh my God, like one of the best drummers I've ever experienced. It's ridiculous how good she is. But
underrated for sure.
So I would say, I think you get, I'm gonna give you 9 out of 10 foxes.
That's pretty good. 9 out of 10 foxes.
Yeah,
like foxes in the UK, they're just like raccoons. You see them all around.
I did not know that.
Yeah, like on my first night I was in London, I saw a big ass fox. It was like at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, what's going on? But I love anytime a fox shows up in something, I'm just like, oh, little magical woodland creature.
Yeah, and it's a weird way it sort of appears in this album too, like a sort of like fable like song at the beginning. But we'll dive into that.
There's some myth going on. Okay, so 9 out of 10 foxes. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So let's start as you begin to build the case for the Woods. Let's start by talking about your first introduction to this album. What do you? How would you characterize the experience of your being introduced to this particular album, and what that experience was like?
Well, this was not my introduction to Sleater-Kinney.
Right.
My introduction to Sleater-Kinney came from one of my best friends in college. Her name was Nitsa, and she loved Sleater-Kinney in a way that no one else, I think, probably on the entire campus did. And I think at the time I was sort of into it, but not totally into it. I remember making a mix CD at our graduation for my close group of friends, and I had everyone contribute 2 songs, or they contributed 1 song onto the mix, and then I picked a song to represent everybody. And she contributed the song "Stay Where You Are," which I believe is off their Call the Doctor album.
Okay.
And so I always associated the band with her, but it never quite sounded like my thing per se. then after college, I lived in Chicago for a couple of years, and there's this record store on Milwaukee Avenue in the Wicker Park neighborhood called Reckless Records.
Reckless.
And
Iconic.
yeah.
Iconic.
And I remember
Chicago.
one day, like I would always just go in there and just see, what they had. And I think one of the albums they had at the front was they were recommending what at that time was the newest release from Sleater-Kinney, which was One Beat.
One Beat.
And
the album just before this one.
Yes, the album just before this one. And I think it was they may have even had stations where you could put headphones on and listen to some of the tracks and decide whether or not you wanted to buy it.
That's cool.
And because I feel like I remember doing that. I don't think I would have bought an album without having heard a single song on it, but I did. I bought that album.
Not at full price, at least, right? You probably would be.
I mean,
if you're buying something new.
Well, full price, but maybe because of the label that they were on at the time, full price wasn't that expensive. I feel like I might have only paid like $12.99 for it or something.
This was the first album with Sub Pop?
No, this was I think the last album on Kill Rock Stars. Because I think the Woods was their.
You're
first
talking
album
One Beat, or yeah, right. You're right. I'm sorry. I thought I was referring to the Woods, but
yeah,
One Beat was just before they switched to Sub Pop.
Yeah, and so that I really, really got into that album. It's a very post 9/11 album. There's a song on the album that's just, it's about 9/11 essentially, and not in like a cringy way, because I feel like sometimes when artists respond to specific events in certain ways, you're kind of like, okay, do you really have to write a song about it? Yeah. But it didn't seem that way. So that's how I finally got into the band. The way I discovered the album, I think actually my friend Nitsa was visiting me in Philadelphia, and I don't know how I found it, but I remember them saying that there were like tracks from the album had been like leaked online early or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I, like any good music enthusiast of the time period, I downloaded them, and I think we were listening to the tracks, and I remember, I think The Fox was the first album I heard, or first track I heard from it. I remember thinking, wait a minute, I think there's a mistake. I don't think this, because back in the era when we all downloaded MP3s, sometimes you download a track and you listen to it and you realize you had not selected the right song, or someone had played a trick on you or something like that. So
it was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
It was Wild Wild West, right? And it's. I remember thinking, something's wrong. And so I listened to another track and I was like, no, wait, that's them, but like something, maybe it hasn't been fully produced. Maybe these are raw tracks. So then when the album actually came out and I realized that those tracks had been correct the whole time, it was sort of a revelation to me, because it just felt like they were doing something very different, which, honestly, what they were doing was they were creating an album that sounded the way that they actually sound live. I think up until that point, every single album felt like it had the sort of studio sheen on it in some ways.
It lacked some of that grime that they probably that's an essential part.
I mean, their albums up until that point had sounded not sanitized, but like compared to the way they sound live. Because seeing them live is an experience. They are loud. It is aggressive. It's amazing. But the Woods sounds the way that they sound live, unlike any other album that they've created.
That's great.
And that, to me, I think that was. It wasn't an album that I immediately loved, which I think is often the hallmark of a good album. If you love it right away, I think you're going to get tired of it quickly. But if it grows on you, I feel like you develop more of an appreciation for it. So
yeah, it's well said.
It's just over time. To me, it's my favorite Sleater-Kinney album. It feels like it's them in their most raw, unadulterated form. And it sounds like the way they sound live, which is loud and just a lot. They are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
sound. They are a wall of sound.
It is maximalist in that way. The sound it's interesting that it's not terribly complex instrumentation. The songs themselves are not terribly, it's not that they're not complex, but they're just kind of, it's like very muscular. It's very muscular music. So that's where the maximalism comes in, I think, even when you don't have a sort of really complex production style or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I mean, it's there's not as many layers, right? And I don't mean that in terms of like, you know, interpretation of lyrics or anything like that. I mean that in terms of the number of instruments. I mean, it's just two guitars and drums, and you know, harmonica on the one song, but like that's all it is. And so for them to generate that sort of sound with just two guitars and a drum set, like that's ridiculous to me.
Then that makes you think about what the forces, you know, if you think of it in kind of like a supernatural or maybe like spiritual way, like what's the force that's happening just outside of the technical thing that's happening? What is existing in the space with you when you're listening to that music is really, it's spooky. It's spooky because you think, wow, there's something beyond, there's something happening that I can't perceive really. There's something happening. It's working on me. That's a pretty cool moment when you can have that with an album.
That's kind of a great way to describe Corin's voice too, which I mean seems otherworldly to me whenever she sings. I mean, the way she sort of wails, it's just it feels like it's not of this earth when she sings and when she goes to those places.
Mm-hmm. And there is something, you know, dear listeners. It's the first time we've said dear listener so far in this episode, which is probably good. We've said it a lot. But it could be, you know, I don't know, they're dear to us. Anyone who's listening to this is dear to us. Go take a listen. We'll introduce you to some songs here in a bit, but take a listen to her voice, because it is sort of like, it's hard to describe really. There's almost a cartoony quality to it at times that I think is really effective. This very theatrical sort of quality. The wailing. Wailing's a good word. Wailing's a good word to express some of what she does.
It's very Riot Girl. It's also very, to coin a phrase from a friend of the pod, one of our friends, Meg, there's someone in her life who described them as tardy girl shouty band.
Tardy girl shouty band, right? Yes.
Which is, you know, I find a little reductive and also accurate at times.
Yeah. I mean, there's you see this. Oh man, Riot Girl's so cool, isn't it? It's just so cool because it's something that has definitely, you can see the lineage of it through each kind of decade. You see what the Riot Girl sensibility was, how it was manifest in each decade from the 80s to the 90s. So like the punky girl energy at that time was so, like those other bands that were part of the scene, like Bikini Kill and you can Bikini Kill and the other bands that what were the other bands that Carrie and Corin were in?
Oh, as the minute you asked me that question, all the names left my brain.
Yeah.
I feel like one of them was part of Heavens to Betsy.
That was Corin. Yeah.
I think that was Corin. I don't remember what band Carrie was in.
There's a number. It was 17. Something 17.
I can't remember.
I'll look it up in a bit.
And Janet had been in a band too, I thought. Janet, who also has gone on to play drums for Stephen Malkmus and the Jicks.
And the Jicks. I like that band. That band's cool.
Yeah. And
they're all part of that. Yeah. So they're all part of that scene. But then you love to see like the roots. You can see Patti Smith in their presence. You can see the bands from that era, like the Velvet Underground, and like you can feel that energy in there.
I feel like there's a little bit of Heart too in some ways.
Oh yeah.
Like like 1970s Heart, like Barracuda, you know.
Yes, the good stuff.
Carrie is apparently working on it's I think a Heart biopic.
Ooh, like she's going to be acting in it?
No, I think she might be directing it.
No way.
I'm not. Don't 100% quote me on that, but I feel like I listened to her do an interview and she was talking about that.
Yeah, Heart's kind of badass too.
Yeah, I mean this album though. I mean, while it definitely there is the Riot Girl lineage, there is also. This album does feel to me a little bit like there's sort of a venturing into classic rock. Yeah. I mean, just thinking about, you know, towards the end of the album, Let's Call It Love, the like 12-minute long jam that goes into the final track of the album after that. It sounds we're not going to play it for you, dear listeners, but I highly recommend that you do listen to it at some point, because it's just impressive.
Epic.
And it has
Epic.
the weight of the sort of music that was being made in, I would argue, like in the 70s. It feels like there's sort of a 70s rock root there.
I would say so.
This album just feels thick to me. Like it's just when you listen to another Sleater-Kinney album and then listen to The Woods, it just, I'm not
substantial.
Yeah. I'm not one of those people who, experiences, what's it called? Synesthesia.
Sounds, colors and all that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not that kind of person, but thick feels like a good adjective for this album.
Yeah. There's a weight to it. Like you said.
Yeah,
there absolutely is. I feel like most of the people we've talked to this season, the album that they chose was sort of like their first introduction to a band. But for you, it's just kind of a continuation of their body of work, which is another sort of experience, isn't it? Like understanding how an artist is contextually can either be very important to somebody's experience of art or something that distracts from the piece of art itself. Has your love for them already grown, only grown from here, or do you feel like they are making albums after this that are of similar quality to you? Like how does that timeline exist for you?
It was sort of the peak of my love for the band, but because of the fact that they took an indefinite hiatus after this album, I was able to sort of sustain that peak for a while, so that when they did come back and released No Cities to Love, it was like when I got to see them in concert again for the release of that album, it was the greatest day of whatever year that was. I think it was 2015. It was just amazing. Yeah. I feel like I just picked up where they left off.
Really? What a special thing.
Yeah. I think part of what helped is the fact that like I had friends who also still listened to Sleater-Kinney and loved them as much as I did. So there was that, it was being nourished and sustained. Their more recent albums are not they're not why I love Sleater-Kinney. I think when the next album came out, The Center Won't Hold, when that album came out, that's the one St. Vincent produced, and it's the one that after that Janet Weiss left the band. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit.
That record did.
Yeah, I understand, like, they're artists. They want to go in a different direction. And, of course, because I grew to love Sleater-Kinney during my formative years, I feel like I'm always going to be attached to that version of Sleater-Kinney. And I'm always going to be a little resistant to them doing something to stray from that path too much. And I can say that now, with a little distance, I can say that. But at the time when The Center Won't Hold came out, there are still a couple of songs on that I am just angry about. I'm just like, really? Why did you put this on the album? And I do sort of feel in some ways like there was a period of time where I was like, oh, St. Vincent breaking up the band. Like there's that sort of, which is not true. That's not true. It's just how I felt in the moment.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I need to sort of do some research into other albums I might have heard that Annie Clark of St. Vincent, what she's produced. But to me, it felt like that one, it just sounded a lot like St. Vincent is what it felt like to me. And there's nothing, I like St. Vincent a lot, but I think if I'm going to listen to a Sleater-Kinney record, I want to listen to a Sleater-Kinney record. I hear what you're saying about how it's not to say that it's not right for them to evolve and want to change, but it did feel a little bit like an interloper when you look at it in that way.
It did, and I think that there are a few St. Vincent songs that I like on the whole. She's not really, or they're not really my thing. I'm actually not sure what St. Vincent's pronouns are. But the I don't know. There's always something kind of technically precise but cold to me about St. Vincent music.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that is never an adjective that I would have used to describe Sleater-Kinney's music. So The Center Won't Hold, while there are some, and I will say that when I saw them live after The Center Won't Hold came out,
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated some of the tracks more when they played them live. I was like, oh, this still sounds like them when they play it live, with a few exceptions. But I don't know. And their most recent album that they released during the pandemic, I don't mind, actually. A lot of people not huge fans of it. But
I like what I've heard.
It's fine. It's not in my top 5 of their albums, but it's probably number 6.
Sure, but that's I don't know. I watched a little bit of that Beatles documentary. I haven't watched the whole thing. I don't know have you watched any of it yet?
I still haven't. Yeah, I haven't
it's fascinating for a while, and just to kind of really reflect on what we expect of the artists that we interface with, that we consume. I don't want to say we don't consume them, but we participate with them. We have very high expectations for them as an audience, don't we? And we sort of expect novelty, or we want something new. We want something that's going to be even more affecting than the last thing that we had. And I think being able to have a relationship with an artist like that, you're sort of the way that you're expressing it right now, it sounds like as these successive albums come out, it sounds like it doesn't really offend you that these albums aren't living up to the quality of the Woods for you. Is there a particular reason why you think that might be? Like, is there, because I know a lot of fans of certain bands will get frustrated if they feel like they're not, they're just making things that aren't high quality.
Well, because I wouldn't call their 2 most recent albums low quality. I mean, I still respect them as artists. I still respect them as musicians. I still think that they put out two solid albums that are not my thing.
Sure.
And maybe it's also because of the fact that, like, I think about, I think about a band like Radiohead. There we go. Dropped the band name. I think of a band like Radiohead who has been known for just reinvention with every single album. So you're not surprised. Like, if they were to come out with a very straightforward acoustic, almost country album, I feel like we'd be like, okay, bit of left field, but we'd still be like, well, but that's right. We never know what to expect. Whereas most of the first 6 albums that Sleater-Kinney released, while there is some variation in terms of the music, on the whole, I would say their sound stayed very similar for all of those albums. So the Woods was a bit of a departure in the sense that it just was more raw. And, from what I've read, the recording process was very frustrating for them, for the Woods. I mean, they worked with a different producer, the guy who produced the Flaming Lips, if I'm not mistaken. And he sort of started the sessions by saying, none of your albums, I love you all, and none of your albums sound the way that you sound live, and I want to try and capture that. And in order to do that, I think he really pushed them. I mean, you listen to Corin's voice on the opening track on the Fox, and I mean, it sounds like she, like, get her a fisherman's friend after she's done singing that, because it is just, I imagine she must have had laryngitis after for like weeks after recording it. But even so, even though it was a bit of a departure for them, it still sounded like them. When The Center Won't Hold came out, I did not recognize the band, and so that to me, there was there was a brief moment of betrayal, but then, like, my wiser self got over that and realized that, well, they're artists and they want to make some changes, and maybe they want to change the way. Maybe it's hard to rock that hard for so many years. Maybe they want to make songs that are a little more melodic. Maybe, even though they've been indie darlings for so long, maybe they want to make a track that sounds a little bit more like a pop song in some ways. And I would argue there are a couple songs on the Center One Hold that sound like pop songs, whereas I could think of maybe 2 songs in their entire catalog before that album that would qualify as a pop song.
That fits to me for their contemporaries too. Like, a lot of the bands that were making music, like, I think of Pavement. Pavement's I think maybe a very good analogy for them. Pavement has a lot of really great songs and a lot of really popular songs, but never had many hits. There wasn't like they weren't driven by, and that's where they never had their creep. They never had that song that just kind of transcended them as a band. I need to give you some points. I'm going to give you 2005 points for the year that the album came out. 2005 points for Fisherman's Friend. I'm glad that Fisherman's Friend made it in. So we'll give you 2,005 points for that. And Fisherman's Friend. And then I'm going to give you an extra 16 points for bringing up Stephen Malkmus and the Jicks, because just one of those weird band names.
You know what's funny? It's about the Fisherman's Friend. If I'm not mistaken, Corin is also part of a band called Filthy Friends, I believe is the name
Filthy
of it,
Friends, yeah.
which features her and one of the former members of REM. I want to say it's Peter Buck.
Oh, yeah.
Peter Buck, and then three other people who I feel like if I were a better indie rock fan, I would know who they are. Actually, I saw them live before. Was it before Center Won't Hold came out? I think it was before Center Won't Hold came out, and my friend Meg and I went to go see them because we just wanted to be in the room with Corin.
Yeah.
And it was a much smaller, I mean, it's the smallest venue I've ever seen a member of Sleater-Kinney in Philly. I think it was at Johnny Brenda's.
What's that comparable to in Chicago? Like a Shuba's or something?
I never saw a show at Shuba's the entire time.
Those were fun.
Or wait, did I see something at Shuba's? No, I didn't.
Well, they're pretty fun shows. It's good.
I bet you it's pretty close to what I imagine Shuba's to be. It is smaller than the Metro.
Smaller than the Metro. Okay. Did you ever go to Lincoln Hall?
No, I never went to Lincoln Hall.
That's another good venue.
I bet it's like somewhere comparable to Shuba's, I think, in terms of size.
In terms of how I experience their sound, Lincoln Hall in Chicago seems like you need to go there someday. It sounds like the perfect venue to just they're a little bit too big for it, but that would probably be fun. Just put your earplugs in and friggin' go, dude. Go.
The venue can mean a lot because I always enjoyed seeing a show at the Metro because I thought it had pretty venue. Decent acoustics. Yeah. But I remember seeing the White Stripes at the Aragon. I saw the White Stripes twice. I saw them at the Metro and then I saw them at the Aragon, and night and day, because at the Metro it was amazing and immediate. And even though it was, like only an hour long because their songs are so short, it felt like an hour of kick-ass music. The Aragon, which is what they moved to when they got bigger, and the acoustics in there are terrible. I
don't love that venue. Yeah, I don't love the Aragon, but the Riv is good. The Riv just down the street is good. Have you been there?
I feel like I must have, but I can't remember which show.
I guess that's Broadway right there. Broadway and Lawrence. Big ups to Chicago. Chicago's showing up in this show.
Yeah, shout out. That's where I've seen most of the times I've seen, or maybe half the times I've seen Sleater-Kinney. It's been in Chicago. So
good old Chicago. Yeah. I think this might be a good time for us to introduce your standout track.
Sure.
So of all of the songs on the album, you've been briefed to pick one standout track for you, and you can explain why it's the standout track for you as well.
Oh, I'm going to, because I feel like, I would say like 9 out of 10 of these tracks I could choose as a standout track for different reasons. But right. I mean, I sort of decided, since not everyone might be as familiar with Sleater-Kinney as I am, I thought I should choose something that seems like the most trademark song for them off this album, the song that really captures their sound, that captures the sort of like interweaving of Corin and Carrie and Janet all together to create this sort of musical force. And it's actually the first single off the album. Not that they were really people who release singles, but it's a song called Entertain.
Entertain. It is. Yeah, this one goes. This one goes as well.
Does it go to 11?
So it goes straight to 11, dude. Okay, so everyone, we'll leave you for a moment with "Entertain" by Sleater-Kinney.
Yeah, watch your ears.